By some people's measure, autumn has begun. But what is certainly going on in our garden, whether it's autumn or not, is harvest time. What I'm doing right now is harvesting some corn. I've been picking a few cobs of sweet corn because it's reaching maturity now. We've been eating sweet corn every day, lots and lots of cobs, as much as we can, but it's time to actually put some into the freezer. Now, because we're off-grid in terms of electricity, that means that we can't run a large freezer. Our freezer capacity is very limited. The amount that we're going to be able to freeze is very small. So we probably will have to give a little bit of this corn away to some friends so that it doesn't become too old. But today I wanted to show you not just this corn which I'm freezing, but also some of the other things that are happening in the garden, and one which is quite interesting, which is drying some plums. In terms of freezing this corn, it's a fairly simple process. It's just a matter of filling the pot. I steam this corn until it's pretty close to cooked. Then I use a good sharp knife to cut it off the cobs and let that corn cool before actually putting it in bags in the freezer. This Satsuma blood plum is one of the most reliable producers of food that we have. Every year it produces a massive load of these beautiful blood plums, and they're just coming to ripeness now. Generally what we do with these is to bottle them. Now, of course, we eat some as well, but there's no way you can consume anything near the amount of fruit that you get from a tree like this. So preservation is absolutely necessary. And in most years that has been just bottling, and I have a video, I think, from the very beginning of this channel showing how we bottle these plums. And we will get 70, 80 bottles normally of plums a year from this tree, plus we'll consume a lot and give some away too. This year, however, I'm going to try another preservation method as well, and that is to dry some. Now, some of you may recall that a few months ago I built a wood-fired dehydrator. For those of you that haven't seen the video, I'll put a link to it up in the corner and you can go and have a look. So this morning I came early and I picked the ripest of these plums that I could find. I then cut the stone out of them and cut them into quarters. Basically, the goal is to get them into as even sizes as possible, and fired up the wood-fired dehydrator. So let's go and take a look and see how they're going. Ever since I built this dehydrator a few months ago, I've been looking for the opportunity to give it a good test. Now, we haven't had a lot of produce that's really been sufficient or of the appropriate type to put in here. A couple of weeks ago, I put a load of half zucchini and half of it green beans, that's fresh green beans, in it, and dried those. Now, they did really well. And by the end of the day, certainly by the next morning, because I started at around about 9 in the morning, and the next morning early I came and checked it. It had gone out overnight, but by next morning they were really nice dry veggies. And you know, what starts as a very large amount of vegetable finishes as a really small bag. And the flavour that's still there is really good. It tastes like a fresh vegetable. So they'll be interesting to utilise. But in terms of fruit, which is really one of the tastier things to dry, I haven't had anything sufficient to put in here. So these plums are my first attempt. And I'm really interested to see how it goes, because the traditional dried plum is the prune, and prunes are much sweeter than these blood plums. These blood plums still have a certain amount of tang about them, so I'll be really interested to see what the end result is. In terms of temperature, I have these two gauges here on the side, these little gauges. I ordered them on eBay. They were not the size I expected. I was really after something much bigger that I could read easier. But they work and they give me an indication. Now it is showing quite a bit warmer on the bottom than the top. Currently there's about a 15 degrees Celsius variation between the top and the bottom. It's around about 60 at the bottom and 45 at the top. Something around 50 would be more ideal if it was even. What that means to me is I really need to rotate these racks occasionally, take the bottom to the top, top to the bottom, so that it evens out. Adding a fan might be one way of achieving that, but we'll see how it goes with this lot of plums first. But it's running fairly well, and I only need to put an occasional log on it. It doesn't need a hot fire to maintain the correct temperature. So let's open it up and see what's happening. Well, I have 6 trays in here with plums, and I can smell the aroma of the drying plums. Now down here is obviously the hottest, and they're drying the fastest, and you can see they're already starting to look dry on the outside, and I'll give you a close-up of that so that you can actually get a better idea. And the top tray is drying quite well too, but not quite as fast as the bottom. So because of that, I will swap this over and swing them around top to bottom, bottom to top, completely reversing what's in here. Got a little variance in these homemade trays in terms of their width, so some of them are a little bit wider than others and don't sit quite as well. Now this was one large bucket full of fruit, and it will reduce down. So when I say a large bucket full, I think a 15 litre bucket, not the standard 10 litre bucket. So I've reversed those around now, and I will probably do that again in a few hours. Now the interesting thing in terms of the temperature is having the door open like that has dropped the temperature at the bottom, but hasn't significantly changed the top temperature. I have the vent at the top fairly wide open, and I can feel the heat really flowing out of that. But generally I think it's going quite well, and it's really ideal for this weather that we have right now, where a solar dehydrator wouldn't actually work, and having off-grid power means that electric ones are not really feasible. So we'll come back in a few hours and see how these are going. The other thing that I'm really interested to try in the dryer, of course, is some tomatoes, and they're just now really starting to ripen. There's quite a large number of good tomatoes on. However, it's quite late in the season, so going to be a question as to how well the last of them that are only just sort of set recently ripen and how well they develop. The early ones are looking really fantastic and are going to give us some really nice tomatoes. So I don't know how much crop I will have over from our regular use in terms of doing things like sauce, but I'm sure I'll find some that I can actually put in that dehydrator and give it a test with tomatoes. Well, it's been about another 4 hours since we last looked at it, and I've come to check the fire again. Yes, I've had to feed it in between times. About every hour I come and just check it, because it's only a small fire and running low, and you can't really stack too much in because that would overheat it. You have to check it reasonably frequently, but that's a fairly simple job. But let's see what's happening with this fruit. I'll bring you in closer so you can see it's getting quite a bit darker, and you can see it's drying quite nicely. The side of the plum that has the skin on it is the slowest drying. The cut side is drying best. So something like this though, it's getting there. Have a taste. It's starting to get the dried flavour, but and a lot less moisture in, but still has a way to go. You can see how much less space they take up now than they did at the beginning. I'll be interested to see by morning what it looks like. I'll check this fire again in the next hour and continue to check it as the evening comes on. It'll probably be another probably another 3 hours before my last check of the fire, and then it'll be until it goes out. So I imagine that this fire is going to run for at least another 6, 7, maybe 8 hours before it goes cold overnight. So it'll be really interesting to come back in the morning and see what it looks like and see if it's actually achieved full drying by morning, which would be great, or whether I need to light it up again. Well, it's now the next morning and I've come back to see what it's like. Well, let's have a look. The fire has now been out for a number of hours. So what have we got here? This has dried a lot more, this bottom tray, and by the feel of it, these pieces are pretty dry. There's one or two pieces that could maybe dry a little bit more, but most of this is pretty close to dry. Quite chewy, quite nice, tasty, plum flavour, but a higher tray like this one, I can see there's still more drying needed. There's still too much moisture in something like this, and so I need to fire it up again, do a few more hours. So another higher tray, and you can see there's still a lot of moisture in there. So I'll light it up again this morning and move these trays around. Basically, I'm moving them around to try and even the drying process. I'll fire it up and run it for a few more hours and we'll see when it's ready. In the meantime, while they continue to dry, it's time to come and pick more plums. This lot will probably go for some bottling because the ripening doesn't wait. Well, it's now late afternoon and this is the second day I've been drying these plums. And I'm going to open up and have a look, but I'm pretty sure that the majority of them are now dry. In all, they've probably been about 24 hours of actual heat in this dehydrator, taking out amount of time, of course, that it wasn't running overnight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these trays out and actually take out all the ones that are nicely dry, keeping only onto one tray the few that have not dried sufficiently. And because the fire is still going, there's still some coals in there, I'll leave it for that residual heat to dry it. So the majority, just judging by feel, are dry enough, but there's an occasional one that still has a little bit of moisture that's perhaps a little bit too much sitting in a pocket, and I would question its keeping quality. So that's the ones that I want to put back in. During the day today, as you can see, I've done these bottled plums as well. So combining the last 2 days with these dried plums, the frozen corn, it's been productive in terms of storing the harvest. After going through all the trays, I'm left with this one tray, which could just go that little bit longer. So I'll put this back in for the residual heat to just dry that little bit more, and this bowl that I believe is adequately dried. So I'll put that one on the bottom where it will get the maximum amount of heat, and check the fire. There's a nice few coals there. That'll probably still give off a good amount of heat for probably a couple of hours yet, and should dry those out sufficiently. So far I'm really quite happy with how it works, and as I said, there's things like tomatoes that I still have to try, and I'll probably be doing some more of these plums as well in the next couple of days. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching.